in the 10 minutes of that music, there are probably, well, 50 sync points, probably 5 sync points a minute minimum, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So, you know, were you equal to get?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's fair to say, isn't it? I mean, that many.
Some cases even more.
And do you remember, Ken, that I made take after take and I couldn't get it. I caught 3 cues, but not 5. And the next, and it sounded great. The orchestra was great. It was me to talk about conducting. The next take, I got 2 cues and missed 3, and it was, you know. So finally, Stephen said, "Why don't you just go out there and play the music? We know that it fits the outline of the film because you prepared it that way. And play it the way you want to play it, with all the rubato and everything that feels natural music, and I will recut the film to the music." So this is what happened, and I think, and I've always felt that the last musical part of that film, for the reason it has such a lift to it, I think it's because it was music first and editing refinement second.
No, I must say that was very little the editing of what you did.
Well, frames probably, Kenny, but by that time the orchestra knew.
We've done this picture the first time. You stopped by at Malemo on your way to Boston. I remember this the first day of really dubbing it. And when we got the last reel, Stephen kind of let me have my way about levels with the music mixer and all that.
That's lovely.
And it was a very special time. And when I got through, I covered up a couple lines of dialogue we called Dogback.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned, Stephen was on the other side of the room, and I leaned back, and I had tears streaming down my face. I said, "That's the way I feel it." He says, "Go with it." And that's pretty much the way it finished. And your score, to this day, I run that film, and tears go down my face.
You know, Ken, we performed the whole score at the Shrine Auditorium a couple of years ago. I don't think there's more than 5 minutes in the film where the orchestra isn't playing. 10, I think, max.
I don't know how you did it.
So we had the orchestra on stage and the sound and dialogue on separate stripes and 2 mixes, one to handle the effects and the other dialogue, and we took all the music out and performed it all live the whole 2 hours. And that was a nightmare. But the only other thing I would say, and it sounds self-congratulatory, and I really don't want that, but I'll say it anyway in response to your question about the temp track. Here's an example of why I feel they're hurtful creatively. The score of Jaws, good, bad, lawful, indifferent, whatever it is, wouldn't have existed if there were a temp track. Because I was looking at that film thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do with this? What will work? Find some idea, as lame-brained as it may have been, that wouldn't have been found in a temp track. It had to be conceived, again, badly or well, for that particular use. And I don't think, Kenny, did you do those, John? I think, again, Stephen is really so sympathetic to music that it's really tough to get, if I haven't calculated as well as I should have, and need another foot or two to complete a good crescendo, he will always say, "Go ahead and do it, and I'll have a little film." And Mike Kahn, whose editor gives me daggers with
questions? Yes.
Going back to your Boston experience, what kind of differences did you find that you had to, and changes you had to make in conducting live orchestra for concerts with no sync picture as opposed to going to the studio? I mean, what did you have to do here differently?
Well, I think conducting for film is, in one sense, one of the hardest things we have to do, because the film is so mechanical and so unrelenting in its rhythmic aspects, at least. So that if you want to stretch our own time in a live performance and have a good orchestra, you just do that, and it would be lovely. Also, temping from night to night. I mean, you may want to slow things or quicken them and all that. So I think, in certain mechanical respects, the 2 areas of conducting that are the hardest, from a mechanique point of view, film and ballet, where the movement of the dance dancer's bodies are such. I mean, people are falling or spinning. I mean, the gravity in their bodies, you can't wait, and you can't hold them up in the air like that. I mean, something that is, with singers even, there's more, I think, give and take. Having said that, the art of conducting, which I would approach only in this very small way, and at the level of, say, for example, James Malline or say Giselle or others who do that, practice an art an interpretive art that's at a level we don't have in the film industry. When I was a kid playing, I had two conductors that I worked for. Alfred Newman, who could have, I think, had a career as a conductor, I believe, and also Victor Young, who maybe people may not know. He was a wonderful composer, a violinist who graduated from Waterloo Conservatory and a pro, a classical repertoire professional with a stick, and that showed in his film work, at least from our point of view of the orchestra. But I think a lot of conductors, and they've told me this, Seiji and others, have said, I'd be terrified if I had to do that syncing, that immovable set of challenges that we have. And it's a trick, and it's a knack, and it takes a lot of practice. So I guess the short answer to your question is it's a different world than Boston. Has its difficulties and its differences and challenges that I think are unappreciated by those who've never conducted in a film studio before.
Someone from this side of the room? Okay, over here.
So,
I recently saw Munich, and I have two questions about that film. The first is there are long sections of that film that are not scored. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your spotting experience on that film and why those decisions were made. And the second, the end title to the movie I just found to be devastatingly beautiful and very moving. And I have years of experience singing in Jewish temples, and it seemed to me that in that, and as well as at other times in the film, that there were at least nods to Jewish melodies that I recognized. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your inspiration for the music for Munich. And also I was talking with one of my colleagues about it. There also seemed to be nods to Arabic examples of melody writing and of orchestration. I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about Munich and that process.
yes, thank you. From the point of view of the spotting, I really don't remember the meetings all that well, but I think that I'm right in saying that both Spielberg and I, looking at the film, felt that it's drifting in the direction of a documentary film, might be fair to say. And it's not an action film, it's not a James Bond film, even though we see aspects of street action that we've seen elsewhere. It's done more with a view to a historical relevance, I think, let's put it that way. And so that was a signal, I think, to both of us, not to score it in the usual way that you might enhance or adorn physical action scenes in the normal, I'll put it absurdly, like in Indiana Jones, where you do fight scenes like comedic ballet, deliberately. So less music than usual for that reason, because of the documentary nature, I guess you could say, of it. The spotting, I think, took a general direction very quickly by agreeing that the flashbacks would be scored, the flashbacks to the Munich tarmac atrocities, and that we would have some kind of music to accompany those flashbacks. Not action music, but something that might suggest the tragic weight of what we were seeing without overdoing it, without pulling too hard on the orchestra and the musical areas. So I think that that's a pretty loose answer to your question about spotting, but I think it went to the overall substance, I guess, of that. In terms of the ethnic aspects of music, very interesting. The Jewish music and an attempt to elicit a little atmosphere of the Middle East, Palestinian music. I remember having a conversation with Stephen that connected to my experience with him on Schindler's List. And Can I just tell a very quick story about Schindler's List? I don't want to keep everybody too long. I'll tell you this as quickly as I can because it relates to your question about Jewish music. Stephen showed me this Schindler's List of film. There was no music in it. At the end of the running, it was in the Hamptons, and they were told we could have a spotting session about the music. And at the end of the Schindler's List, I was so devastated about it, I couldn't speak. Remember the last scene where at the graveside of Oscar Schindler, where the survivors or the children of survivors are put placing stones in the back. I said to Stephen, excuse me, and left the room, walked around the parking lot, and came back in 5 minutes later, having caught my breath, to begin discussions about spotting the music. And I said to Stephen, not being meaning to be deprecating or anything, just what I felt, I said, Stephen, if you need, for this film, you need a better composer than I am. And he said, I know, but they're all dead. So I never really studied Jewish music except way, way back in 1970. I went to the University of Jerusalem on a visit there when I was doing music direction for Fiddler on the Roof, and I went up to the music library at the university and told them why I was there, and I prowled around there for a day or two or three, listening to the shtetl music, mostly from Poland and those areas, and looking at some old Yiddish language films from Warsaw. So what I knew about Jewish music and know now is really very little. I mean, I know what we all know, the modal mannerisms that are familiar to us, and most of my teachers were Jewish, and I grew up in the culture that we all share. But I cannot pretend to be an erudite on this subject. I wasn't when I worked on Fiddler and certainly not on Schindler's. But the point that I'm finally getting at is, in our discussions about Munich, I just said to Stephen Lovely, premeditating this, I said, you know, that the music for Schindler's List, which we think of as being Jewish music, isn't that the Jewish European experience? Isn't that what we know from Russia, from Poland, from Romania and Hungary and so on? This film references Israel, the Middle East, Palestinian music, about which I know even less, and that the score would benefit from the colorations of and atmospherics of both of these things. So really, without doing any more research than memory research of what we all know of the Jewish tradition, and meeting a half a dozen or so players of Palestinian or Persian, a couple of players that play the oud, which is a lute-like instrument that you see in biblical reproductions and so on, and a flute instrument, which is the duduk, I understand that it's called, which we also use, which is, I think both instruments are used in I think it may be right to say Israeli music or Hebraic music, perhaps that's correct to say. So I have to say again, I'm not an expert in this. But these players were good, and I wrote for them, and they were able to read and put them into the orchestra. And I tried to, in some of the unisono passages that you will hear in violins, that will have I tried to give it a sense of not what I felt was not the European Jewish culture that I would have perhaps done in the case of Schindler, but something more to suggest Israel. The simple solution of joining the violins with a clarinet or two and the cymbal one, which is a Hungarian instrument, and the duduk, very possibly in some cases, all playing in unison, should have broadened the semitones to the point that it would give it a kind of atmospheric, ethnic coloration, if you like. And that's about as far as I took it from the point of view of research and orchestration, and prepared it that way. My hope was and is that the coloration was the right amount and to the right degree, and hit the right sensibility for people, a sensibility which would vary broadly from country to country around the world. I hope it's right.